On the eve of the Digital Assembly, I would like to share with you ECTA's reflections on where we are and what needs to be done in order to achieve the targets of the European Union set in the digital agenda. The digital agenda adopted last May includes ambitious and consumer-focused targets regarding the availability and the take-up of broadband services. And those are that every European should have access to basic broadband services by 2013, and to high-speed broadband services of at least 30 megabit per second by 2020. However, high-speed networks are only as useful as much as they are actually being used. So the third target is that at least 50% of European households should subscribe to at least 100 megabit per second broadband. The first Digital Agenda Scoreboard that was published 1 year after the adoption of the Digital Agenda clearly highlights the areas on which policymakers need to concentrate in order to achieve the Digital Agenda broadband targets. It is clear that basic broadband services are already very advanced and readily available. However, very high-speed broadband coverage and take-up are quite low, and if the current trend continues, it is quite unlikely that the digital agenda targets will be met. Therefore, policy actions and regulation should focus on extending the availability of very high-speed broadband services and promoting vibrant competition, which has been proven to deliver affordability as well as innovative services to consumers and businesses, which then in turn result in high take-up. Last year, the Commission observed that in some countries, competition has increased, and as a result, consumers started receiving higher broadband speeds. Competition can thrive and bring better services and affordable prices to consumers and businesses only if high-speed fiber networks are genuinely open and allow innovation by challenger operators and pan-European business service providers. It is a requirement of the NJ recommendation that dominant firms have to open up their fiber networks for competition, but the implementation of the pro-competitive rules has been patchy. So an important takeaway from the Digital Agenda Scoreboard is that member states need to commit to open and competitive networks and implement the rules vigorously. Otherwise, European consumers will not benefit from the high-speed services foreseen in the digital agenda. The Commission should also use its new powers if necessary in order to enforce the rules to the benefit of European consumers and businesses. The geographical reach of fiber networks also needs to be extended, which requires substantial investment. The fiber laid down today will be the network of the future, serving end users in the next 40 to 50 years. So we need to find efficient financing models to build open and competitive fiber networks, which are future-proof and will stand the test of time. It also has to be ensured that all players have equal and non-discriminatory access to bottleneck networks, and in order to create conditions to compete on the same terms for everyone. The right regulatory incentives should also be in place. We need a strong signal from the Commission that excessive prices and abusive practices by dominant operators will not be tolerated anymore. Fiber networks, of course, as I said, should be rolled out much more extensively than today, but cannot be reasonably expected to reach every corner of Europe. Complementary wireless broadband technologies are needed to ensure the full availability of high-speed broadband services also in remote and rural areas. In order to provide spectrum-hungry, high-speed mobile broadband services, European operators need the right frequencies, and they need them now. The adoption of the first radio spectrum policy program for Europe is instrumental in this regard. We welcome the commitment of Vice President Cruz and Mr. Hökmark, the rapporteur in the European Parliament, to conclude the radio spectrum policy program swiftly, and urge the incoming Polish presidency to continue the good progress achieved by the Hungarian presidency and to conclude the radio spectrum policy program during their term of office. Once adopted, implementing the rules correctly and in a timely manner will be equally important. As with fiber, the policy framework for the high-speed mobile networks of the future needs to be forward-looking and ambitious. Further frequencies should be released for mobile broadband, especially in the 700 MHz band, which has very ideal characteristics for mobile broadband services. Unlicensed spectrum should be allocated for wireless broadband technologies, particularly in the 5 GHz band. And finally, more transparency is needed in order to be able to identify and address inefficient spectrum use. Therefore, we need an in-depth spectrum inventory. Europe is seeking leadership in global competitiveness. Europe will be, however, only as competitive as competitively its consumers and businesses are being served. If we want European consumers, citizens, students, workers, the elderly, and the disabled to actively use innovative mobile broadband technologies and services at affordable prices, competition has to be ensured from the very outset. This requires the pro-competitive assignment of spectrum, which ultimately benefits consumers. In short, spectrum assignment procedures should be pro-competitive, non-discriminatory, and prevent the creation or further strengthening of dominant players. So in conclusion, competitive operators call for the vigorous application of the NGA recommendation, the adoption of detailed guidance on equal and non-discriminatory access to bottleneck networks, as well as on their pricing, and last but not least, the swift adoption of an ambitious and forward-looking radio spectrum policy program. And of course, we'll look forward to discussing all these issues at the Assembly in the coming days.